Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Exit Wound. I'm your host, Melanie Thompson. So we're getting towards the end of our quote-unquote journey here, and we've talked about everything from those first beginning stages when you first exit the life, all the way to navigating law enforcement, the judicial system, trying to rebuild your life both financially, emotionally. We've talked a lot about pivoting and exploring the art of public speaking, and on the flip side, how to protect your privacy and maintain your boundaries as you get more comfortable in your role as a public speaker and a survivor leader. So today I want to talk about what exactly that means to be a leader. Today I'm joined by somebody that I am super thrilled that is here, one of my role models, legendary feminist activist Ninotchka Rosca. Ninotchka, thank you so much for being here and joining me today. So I want to start off by talking to any survivors of trafficking, of prostitution that might be listening to this today. You know, we understand, as I mentioned in previous episodes, that activism is something that a lot of our survivors end up in. That's the field that they end up going into as they progress in their leadership. So can you talk a little bit about, before we talk about the movement, let's talk about what you do today. What do you do for a living? Any of the work that you've done and contributed to what we call the movement?
What do I do for a living? Nothing. I'm always poor. But I write. Mm-hmm. I write short stories. I write journalism. I take on assignments. And I write novels.
I love that.
Yes. My collection of short stories just was put together in the retrospective collection, actually, and came out about 2 years ago, so it's making its way through the market.
Wow.
Yeah, about 90% of my time is spent in helping a firm, which is AFQIRN, the Association of Fierce Feminists Fighting Imperialism, refeudalization, and marginalization. I work with their international department, and I set up networks with other organizations outside the country. We just had a very fruitful sojourn with Las Rojas of Argentina, one of the really steadfast anti-sex trade groups in Argentina. I think might be the only one. And I went to Manila and gave training, a 2-day training to the Kila Women's Collective. Things like that.
It's amazing work. So to reiterate, you said you write novels, which is amazing because it's taking me well over 10, 15 years to write a book. I haven't written my book yet, so my hat goes off to you. And then you said 90% of your time you work at a firm, which is an organization that combats gender-based violence, violence against women, focuses on transnational feminism, correct?
Correct. It's an organization of transnational women, women who were born elsewhere, grew up elsewhere, or who were brought here, grew up here, but still remain in contact with their ancestral cultures.
I love that.
And we deliberately decided that this would be our constituency, because we needed to help them navigate the differences between the ancestral culture and the new culture in the United States. Yeah.
That's amazing. So, for me, activism always came naturally. I started, as you know, I started very young. I was a kid. And I know that I always wanted to do advocacy and taking our power back for our land from all of the power that was stripped from us as women. I always knew that very, very early on. Can you tell us how or what motivated you to get into this kind of work, to fight for women that came from other places, defending their, like, taking their power back and reclaiming that? What got you into that?
I actually got into it pretty late in my life. I started as a class
Okay.
advocate, for peasants and the working class. And I was a student activist, a student leader. I headed the most radical student organization, of course. And even at that time, I was very young, and I would hear comments. A woman as president of, the organization,
Right.
it will not go well.
Yeah.
I actually rebuilt the organization from a few members to like the strongest organization on campus. And we led the first walkout of the students.
I love that.
Yeah. Thank God. And so all these things remained at the back of my mind.
How old were you around that time when you started leading the class?
When I started, maybe 17.
Wow.
17, 18.
So it's been a lot of years for you.
Yeah.
So, it's interesting. This podcast, we talk a lot about the sex trade, the system of prostitution. We talk a lot about how that affects women and girls in New York City, in other countries, how it's all connected. And I think what's important to talk about is remembering the base. And the base of all gender-based violence, especially trafficking, is just remembering that women are always on an unequal playing field.
Totally.
And being that I call you a mother of the movement, you were one of the people who led the way for me to come in and do something like that. But it's just so interesting hearing that the reason that you started this work in the first place was hearing those inequalities against women and people saying women could never do this. Women aren't strong enough. They're not smart enough. And it's so interesting to see how that parallels into how traffickers, for example, talk to the women that they keep captive, or it's insane.
And I was, when I was in Manila, somebody told me that an ex of mine taught me how to write, and then I left him. And I'm like, taught me how to write? Are you kidding? I was getting published at the age of 12. Yeah. That kind of thing. It was really quite astonishing to me. But we were working on the issue of U.S. bases in the Philippines. And of course, you had all the sex trade around the bases. And from there, I moved on to looking at the impact of militarization on women. And we came across the issue of the comfort women. And then from the comfort women, we discovered the mail order brides. And then, of course, the trafficking that's happening within our environs. And it's really astonishing that people do not realize that the sex trade is racialized, it is gendered, and it is classist.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love listening to you. I feel like I'm always a student in your presence. But it's absolutely true, I want people to understand when it comes to the sex trade, when it comes to the system of prostitution, all of these oppressive intersections lay at the center. There's no way you can talk about trafficking without talking about race. There's no way you can talk about trafficking without talking about class. And I think in order for folks to join the movement, the advocacy, the activism against those injustices and this criminal enterprise, it takes more than just surviving. So I'm a survivor, right? And although surviving all of the crazy messed up things I've gone through is astronomical, that by itself still doesn't make for a good activist. Activism entails a lot of healing, a lot of reflection, getting past the trauma, being able to speak about it in certain ways. What would you say are some attributes that make for a good activist? What helps you become a good advocate?
Advocate is knowing the facts, first of all.
I love that.
Understanding reality and not, falling into constructed paradigms like sex work is work. Come on, baby.
I love
I had an encounter with an American white woman who was very offended when I said something about the sex trade because she said she was a sex worker. And I said to her, you wouldn't last 10 seconds in a Bangladeshi brothel. You have no idea.
I always feel like your strength as an advocate, and then I always feel like the pain and the anger underneath it as well, like we won't even get into all of the different policy debates and everything around this issue, but there is a cultural understanding in our society, especially in a big city like New York City, where so many things are happening, so many different things are happening at the same time. And in our culture, we believe this idea that there's empowerment in prostitution. And that's not the reality. And I want folks to understand how harmful this is. And if you want to advocate against it, you have to know the facts, as you said, and what it truly looks like.
And the reality of it, the texture of the reality. And you must understand that a decision made to enter prostitution is not a choice. It is a decision made for survival. Very often, maybe less than 1% actually enjoy doing this work.
And people don't get that. People, our culture, the movies, men, people outside, a lot of folks will try to get us to think that prostitution is fun. You get money. It's a fun way to live. You do what you want. It's truly degrading and disgusting, and it's built on these foundations of sexism and patriarchy and capitalism and all of these other things. And people don't recognize none of us woke up one day and said we wanted to do this. It usually always came out of a lack of resources or necessity or desperation or marginalization. It didn't come because it was truly enjoyable.
And we look at how the sex trade turns the body into a whole compact capitalist exploitative system.
Something that you mentioned earlier that I really like that you said is that they need to, as an advocate, it's best to not fall into the paradigms, right? The ideas around this. Would you say that is the biggest mistake you see with young advocates, that they fall into these cultural paradigm notions? Or what are some other mistakes that you see young activists making?
Well, I think one of the most prevalent is the expectation that these things will be resolved very quickly. There is a mentality of we have to win today. If you launch a campaign, you have to have victory. I think that forgets the nuances in the movement, where you don't just eradicate a piece of law or a practice, but you change minds.
Yeah.
And that takes a long time. You change values, you change minds, you change perceptions.
I love that answer, actually. It's the truth. Especially now, because we live in a Gen Z society. Well, it's Gen Alpha now, but the young, beyond millennial population. One thing, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because you are my elder, but something that I've noticed is that this younger generation of people, they're really good for activism. They're good at mobilizing. They're good at calling out things that should have been called out a long time ago. They're all about progression and trying to kind of like light the fire under people, right? And that's a great thing. On the flip side, I also notice that they have a very instantaneous mentality, and I need it now. I need to get my reparations now. I need to get answers now. Something needs to be done now. And I've been in the movement over a decade. You've been in the movement way longer than me.
Forever.
So I'm curious to know, like, even in my short lifetime, the changes that have been made are minimal. They're progressing, but they're minimal. Would you say that instantaneous, that instant gratification mindset has contributed to that, to the way that they're thinking, to why they're so impatient, or why they don't know that that it takes a long time to make this kind of change?
I think we are too speeded up,
Yeah.
with social media and everything. I'm like, why don't I have enough time? So it's always like, I want it now, I have to get it now, and so on, that kind of mentality. I remember having lots of time. This was my last trip in Manila. Some friends wanted to have dinner, meet with me, friends on Facebook actually. And I said, I'm going up to this resort city in the mountains to have a break. Why don't you come with me? Everybody dropped everything and decided to come with me. And I was like totally astonished. I just said it so I wouldn't have to make an appointment. and like, oh my God, in New York City, we can't even schedule, synchronize our schedules to have coffee together. Like, everything is more important than friends.
Yeah.
And your colleagues, your co-activists, It's a little sad.
That's actually interesting that you bring that up. There is a lack of time, especially in this state. New York City is and it's one of the things I love about this place.
Yeah.
That we're all go-getters. We're all doing everything and taking on multiple jobs and all of these different things.
Hustling all over.
Hustling. The
Yeah.
positive hustling, right? We're just hustling all the time. And when it comes to this issue, and it comes to activism and advocating, what still astonishes me is that we can still find the time to get together to fight this issue and many other issues that we fight upon. Which brings me to this thought, Ninotchka. You are somebody who does a lot of grassroots organizing. You've done it with the firm. I'm sure you've done it outside of a firm, where you have mobilized yourself, where you have gotten your own materials, where you have protested and walked. Like you said, when you first started, you were heading the walkouts of class, right, at a very young age. And as we know, when we're going back to what I said about surviving, just surviving is not activism, right? Activism includes the studying, like you said, knowing the facts, not getting into the paradigms, understanding the realities, the education, the research. When it comes to grassroots organizing, as opposed to something like political or legislative organizing, what would you say are some of the biggest challenges to grassroots organizing?
Yeah, my organization is all volunteer. We're not paid. And so we're always without resources. How do we, what can we offer?
Right.
Yeah. The one thing we can offer is support, psychological support, friendship, and an ear to listen.
Yeah.
Yeah. And hopefully you get the person to come to the correct decision regarding sex work or whatever they call it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's really important, for folks who are listening who may not understand some of these nuances and the differences, especially with our younger generation, everybody likes to throw out this idea of grassroots, right? And I don't think a lot of folks understand what true grassroots organizing means, right? They are people that want to be radical or that feel that they're radical. And I was like you when I was younger. I was the radical one. Even today, I'm labeled as fiery, or I was always that person. But it didn't necessarily mean that I was an organizer, nor did it mean that I was grassroots. And I think there's a lot of folks, and the movement. Let me back up. The movement in general against this issue, or in any social justice cause, it consists of a mix of people, right? You have people that are more on the research side. You have, advocates that might be on the policy or legislation side. You have the politics side of things. And then you have folks, like you mentioned, that are all volunteers, has no financial incentive, right? Might be doing or juggling 25 other things, uses their own resources out of their own pocket to get people together, to make flyers, to hold protester rallies, and that to me is the grassroots part of organizing. Would you say that that's what grassroots organizing is to you? Yes,
and we actually deliberately chose this style of advocacy, so we would not water down our principles, our ideas, to fit into some grant funding kind of thing, which happens all the time. And also getting into the communities, the low-income, really grassroots communities can be difficult if you do not come from there.
What do you think? Because I live in a low-income community. What do you think blocks? What's one of the challenges to getting into there?
There is a certain patois language.
Okay.
And you don't have it. I don't have it.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So cultural community differences are a barrier. Not having the resources can be a barrier for grassroots organism. This is what I'm hearing. Having everybody never have enough time in New York City is a barrier. Why do you think it's so difficult for people to understand the harms of sex trafficking, the violence in the system of prostitution? Why is there a lack in our community, both at high levels and at the low levels, to provide more resources into this, to do something about this? Why is it so hard for our society to understand the nuances of sex trafficking in the system of prostitution?
Well, because sexual domination is at the root of all manners of oppression and exploitation. It's the most fundamental, the most basic. Yeah, we in a firm look at the what Engels called the loss of mother rights. The defeat of womankind when class was created. And these two came together. As soon as the women lost their freedoms and their rights, class came up. And so we live in a class society, and that is so difficult for them, for people to understand.
Interesting.
that this is the most basic of oppressive systems, sexual domination.
Yeah. No, that's actually really interesting food for thought. Would you say that folks are having a hard time understanding sexual domination and how it's the basic fundament? Or would you say that they're having a hard time or differentiating sexual domination from sexual empowerment or liberation? Is it hard for people to get that?
I think it depends on one's gender.
Yeah.
For men, of course, this is a privilege that they would find very difficult to give up. And for women, we have been indoctrinated for 10,000 years. So to come to that epiphany takes a long, winding road. Yeah.
It's very interesting. And, we could sit here for hours and give a whole history lesson on the gender nuances back in the day.
We do. We actually have a national school of women's activism. I think the next one is in June, by Zoom and in person. Yeah.
Please let us know where we can find the link so that we could definitely join.
Absolutely.
It's interesting because you bring up so many good points, and we talk a lot about, you mentioned how men look at this issue, this overarching thing, as a privilege, and women have been indoctrinated for so long, and we're the ones that struggle with grasping this. And I've also seen this. I've seen this in our community where, there's a lot of this whole idea, these notions of sex positivity and the sex work is work narrative. A lot of that comes from women, and it's really interesting to understand and to hear you saying that, because as somebody who's lived through this, one of the things I used to struggle with as a later teenager was grasping this idea that this wasn't my fault or my choice, or that I wasn't in the driver's seat. But it always came back down to the people who trafficked me and exploited me that made me think that way about myself. And, in hindsight, it was of the opposite gender that kind of subverted my mind to that. So it's just interesting to hear you say that. How long have you been doing, if you had to put a number on it, how many years have you been doing activism? Because you started at 17. So
all my life, I think.
Life.
All my life. Oh, my God. Long time.
Definitely over some decades, I'm sure.
Yeah, maybe 60 years.
60 years.
Yeah.
Thank you for all of your contributions.
And not stopping.
You're still glowing and kicking. You're in your combat boots today. I love that. So in all of the years of work that you've put into this movement, how would you say you've seen the movement change since you started? Like, from where you began, because when you started activism, you were still dealing in the main throes of like comments of people saying things like women could never lead and this, that, and the third. And we know that gradually our mindset and our culture is changing. But how have you seen the movement around anti-trafficking change since you began doing this work?
Well, it's been, wave
Up
like.
and down. Yeah.
It waxes and wanes. And when the capitalist system decides, it has to institutionalize something as informal as prostitution, industrialize it, actually, then you have this big push, this idea that, the sex trade is empowerment, which is really quite offensive to all of us who belong to the second wave. And it waxes, it wanes, and you go with the flow. You work very hard when it's down.
Yeah.
And you relax a little bit when it's up, because there are other people who can take over the work. But you just keep working.
Yeah.
I think we have become a little bit more sophisticated in terms of political philosophy and also our understanding of the status of women. We have also become a little less US centric or Europe centric or white people centric. We have come to understand that there are other categories of people all over the world who are impacted very adversely by the sex drive and its spin-offs.
Yeah.
Like the Philippines right now is the number one source of child sex abuse pornography, according to UNICEF. And I think it is absolutely shameless of these people from England who studied in England to go to the Philippines and advocate for the legalization of the sex trade. And the country is like the number one source of child sex abuse porn.
Right.
My God, how can you even dare?
Yeah.
I was so amazed that people, when I was in Manila, there were people like saying sex work is work. Are you insane? You got children being raped all over the place and snuffed out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Disgusting.
I think that's actually one of the things that I would say I've seen change over the years. I think in the beginning, there are pros and cons to this movement, and not the movement as in us as the advocates, but the movement and how society receives it. In the beginning, we didn't even have the language to define this in our penal codes in the world.
Yes.
What we went off of was what we saw in the movies, the media, and what we were told with one-on-one interactions. So I would say one of the good things I've seen change over the years has been this, like you said, larger recognition of this as an issue, seeing that it affects all different types of people and not just one type of person, noticing how it connects transnationally. We see it overseas. We see it here in New York City. So I do think that our movement has progressed and expanded in that way, and our society and culture is doing a better job at that.
Absolutely. I think we have gone some distance from the happy hooker and pretty baby.
Yeah.
I don't think people think of this as reality anymore.
Yeah. If you missed our previous episode where we talked about Pretty Woman and Taken and those movies, please feel free to check it out. That it's interesting. Like, we only thought that Pretty Woman was how prostitution looked. You fall in love, handsome guy, get good money, and we know that that's not the reality for 90+% of us. 99% of us, right? And I think that something else that I've seen change in the movement over the years has also been on the more negative side. I've seen these nuances come about. Now that more people are understanding this as an issue, and now that more people are understanding that this affects different marginalized groups, now come more opinions about this issue. And like you were just mentioning, you were saying, back in Manila, how could you guys be the biggest area for child abuse and child porn and still want to legalize this criminal enterprise, right? And I think going back to this episode about activism, just understanding, in order to be an activist, a full leader in this movement, more than just the survival part, you have to be able to recognize and combat those nuances, those various opinions from people that feel like there's a world where we can coexist with both this criminal enterprise, sex trafficking, prostitution, and still try to achieve some kind of equality and gender equality or gender, like all of these things. So I think this dichotomy is very interesting. And I think being an activist in this movement requires knowing how to combat that. It went from being something that was rarely talked about and hush hush, and it's the oldest profession and all of those things, right?
Yeah.
And then now you have all of these debates and ideologies around it, and now everybody wants to dissect it from a educational or academic standpoint. The reality is the harms remain the same.
Yes.
And good leaders, good survivor, I don't want to use the term good because that's not what I'm trying to say, but those who have achieved a certain level of leadership in this movement understand that the foundations remain the same.
Yes.
The harms remain the same.
Absolutely.
So I want you to speak now to any person, survivor, who's listening out there to this right now. Let's say we're talking to survivors who have gone through this and they've decided, I want to become a leader. I want to fight this. I want to be an activist, or I want to become an advocate. What do you say to them? What advice do you have for them? What are some things that you think they need to know?
The very first thing is to get organized. You can't do this on your own. This is the thing with working in the sex trade. You get used to being isolated and to the isolation. This is the time, if you want to be an activist, not to be in isolation, but to connect, to collectivize your life. You know, this is a different lifestyle. You'll be dealing with people on an equal basis rather than the usual exploitative condition. And so, get organized is the very first thing. Second is be very clear as to what you expect if you do this. If you're expecting financial rewards, well, no, that's not going to happen. Is it going to make you famous? No. Will it give you an ethical satisfaction? Yes. And will you be able to help women down the road? Yes. Is it an important kind of work? Very important.
I love that. You're so wise. Every time I'm around you, I feel so like such a baby, you know? Like, I always think that I'm like, I've been doing this work for ages. I'm an expert. And then I get around you and I'm like, oh my God, teach me more. Oh. It's the truth though, you know, and we have to pay homage and, you know, like I said, we need to honor you guys, because without your contributions to the movement when you started, I wouldn't be sitting here with the microphone having this conversation.
The best way to honor is to continue the work.
Yeah.
That's the only thing we ask.
Yeah.
We ask for. We don't like medals and plaques and stuff like that.
I think that's important what you said too, because I think there are a lot of survivors who may see survivors who are survivor leaders, and they may want to be like, they might say, I want to be like that person, or I want a medal, or I want an award, right? And I think that I want survivors who are newer to this to understand, you don't do this for awards.
No.
If you're getting into activism in any social justice issue, but specifically about trafficking, if you're getting into this movement to get awards, to get recognition, you're in it for the wrong reasons. And 9 times out of 10, when you join any kind of social justice cause for those reasons, for the wrong reasons, you end up losing your fight. And everything that you're fighting against and you're combating will continue to go on because you're not doing it with the right intentions. For new activists, and I think this comes back to our point about grassroots organizing versus the political or policy side of organizing. You said to them, get organized, be mindful of what you should expect. You're not going to get much money from this, right? You might, if they decide to take the grassroots route, they might have to do these things on their own. They might have to pay for things out of pocket. You know, for those who may not know where to start, where would you tell survivors that they can get organized? What's the first place they can go if they don't know anyone?
They should sign up for the summer school
Of
for
a
the
firm.
School of Women's Activism by a firm, because that will give you the basics. But let me say this. I have organized students. I've organized labor, peasants. The hardest organizing I've ever done is organizing women. The hardest.
Yeah.
And with these other classes or sectors, there's a degree of distance because I'm not a peasant, I'm not a working class person, etc. But when you start organizing women and you are a woman, then it becomes personal and you become emotionally engaged. So, activism is not a lifestyle.
No.
It is a life.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I want to ask you if there are, I talk a lot in previous episodes about the importance of having allies and having allies that may not be survivors work closely with survivors when we organize, when we protest, when we do any kind of activism. If there are allies that are listening to this right now that may want to get involved, that may want to help with the grassroots organizing, or they want to help in their communities, what are some things that they can do to either support a survivor in their activism journey or to support grassroots organizations that work in the community?
There are lots of things. Like, for instance, right now there is a push in New York City to legalize the sex trade. We should oppose this. A firm has been going around the United States getting what do you call those, solicitation records, the criminal records of women, expunge, because those records are an obstacle to their getting out of the trade, getting another job, and so on. So we have been working on that. They can help, absolutely. They don't have to go into the
Like
dark
the
alleys.
Yeah. Yeah, we're not asking to put anybody's safety in jeopardy, for sure.
You can go to the Senate, the legislature, and do these things, or even write letters. But also, keep an eye on your neighborhood, because you'd be surprised where trafficking takes place.
Is there anything else that you want to add that I might have missed about activism, grassroots organizing, community outreach, anything that you would like anybody listening to know if they're interested in getting to be a part of this?
You have to have the willpower.
I love it.
Yes.
And sometimes I'll even add, burnout is real. And sometimes we get tired.
I'm way past burnout.
Yeah. I mean, 60 years is a long time. You can retire at any point. You have my blessing. But sometimes we get tired, we get angry, especially when, like you said, we want things to change now, and it doesn't happen overnight. Especially when oppression has been happening for well over 400, 500 years. So to try to, I go back to the regular saying that Rome wasn't built in a day. So to try to undo all of these classist, racist systems, it's going to take a long time.
Well, fortunately, I'm Asian. And so my sense of time is like eons,
I love that.
Yeah.
So you got all the fight in you. So have that will.
I sometimes when I'm burning out, I imagine I'm standing on top of a hill and looking down time. Looking at time spread out all over the universe. So there's plenty of time.
We can do it. I have faith. The last thing I ask all of my guests, we talk a lot about the work that we do. We talk a lot about the harms, the stress sometimes, the rallying people. It's a lot of work. and we never take the time to celebrate ourselves. Can you tell me one way that you use creativity as a form of resistance? Something that you do that brings you joy or peace when you just want to check out from all of the work?
Oh, as a form of resistance. Actually, once I heard that thing about, being taught how to write, I sat down and wrote a 3,200 word, one sentence short story.
Wow.
And I said, nobody teaches me.
I love that.
I can wield this language better than anyone in your milieu.
Ninotchka Rosca, you are a dream. Okay. Thank you so much for being a leader and for all of the contributions that you've given to myself, to the movement, to survivors everywhere. Thank you so much for joining me today.
You make me very happy, Melanie, for continuing the work.
It's too personal to me. I don't think I could ever stop. Join us next week while I am going to be joined by some amazing guests for our very last and final episode of Exit Wound. We will be talking about reflections and hope for the future, and I hope to see you all there. Ciao.